Yeah, I'm not using this one. Okay, we'll make a start. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this Employment Committee meeting on the 13th of October 2022. First item we have is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. There are no apologies for absence.
Thank you. Item 2 is minutes of the meeting of the 14th of July. Does anyone have any comments, or can we agree these minutes? Agreed? Thank you. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Firstly, I declare on behalf of all members of the committee that we are all affected by any decision on whether to agree a percentage increase to staff pay, as this affects increases to members' allowances. I've been advised by the Head of Legal and Democratic Services that the percentage increase to staff pay, if agreed, may be applied to members' allowances. This will be addressed in the report to Council at the end of this month. It is important for the purposes of this meeting, members must satisfy themselves that they can maintain an open mind and base any decision on the merits of the report. Any other declarations of interest? Louise.
Chair, I'm only mentioning we're not decision makers, but obviously all officers are affected obviously by decisions taken in all of the papers actually tonight.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 4 then. I will hand over to Louise, but I think there were 3 key questions that we needed to consider as we embarked upon the process, and I think they were: what is merited in terms of a pay settlement, what is affordable, and does it make sense to continue down the path of a 2-year settlement from April 2023 to March 2025, or does it make more sense to look at a pay settlement over a different time frame? And what we and the way the discussions developed was it became the view, the consensus that we should focus on what we did understand, i.e. the current levels of inflation, which is a lagging measure, i.e. goods and services cost 9.9% of it. I think it is currently more than they did 12 months ago, rather than try and base a figure on what we thought might happen in 2 years' time, over the following 2 years. Okay, Louise, do you want to take us through it?
Thank you, Chair. So just to give an overview of the paper, just for the sake of the committee. So with regard to the pay settlement, it's in line with the pay settlement procedure that was agreed in July of this year by the Employment Committee. That process then started on the 5th of September, when there were meetings, initial meetings between councillors and staff representatives, where figures, etc., were shared around proposals for a pay award as set out by the Chair. The proposal for this procedure is to look at it for a 2-year period, so that's 23-24 and 24-25. So the meetings proceeded. Numbers were included, including comparative data from other local boroughs, cost of living rises in the previous 2 years, the increase in staff turnover that the council is currently seeing and experiencing, and difficulties in recruiting to different roles. Also inflation rates rising, and generally cost of living rises rising. So again, that was formulated part of that discussion. Then we had the Joint Staff Consultative Group meeting in September. And in September, the councillors received a presentation from the staff representatives around their proposals for a pay settlement. And at that meeting, an agreement was made with regard to a recommendation to come forward to the Employment Committee that an 8% consolidated payment be suggested for all grades. However, that payment be brought forward to the 1st of October 2022. As the Chair has indicated, it was also decided that it would be better to only look up to the 23-24 period, and that we would not look at what any pay settlement would be for 24-25, and that would be paused, and that the settlement procedure would need to be re-looked at next year when there was obviously clear data and you could act upon that data with regard to what was happening. So that recommendation is being put forward to this committee this evening for decision with regards to that pay offer. As per the pay settlement procedure, staff representatives have joined us today, and that is part of that procedure. That is not something that we normally have at our employment committees, but again, if this committee and councillors have any specific questions they want to ask staff representatives, they are here to be able to answer those questions. Also, just to state that as part of this process, the Section 151 officer has also been part of the process, and you will note that there is a statement from him at Section 6 with regard to the affordability of what is being proposed. So again, we need to ensure that from the council's perspective, in the short term, he has stated that it is affordable, but also we need to look at the medium-term financial position, and obviously ensure that savings and income is considered to ensure to pay for this particular pay settlement proposal. I think that's everything I need to probably include, Chair. Obviously, it's back to you, and obviously then to the councillors for any questions.
Thank you, Louise. Before we open up those, we did have a discussion about the last sentence in section 5.1, which ended, savings will need to be made or income increase to pay for the award to ensure that it doesn't cause year-on-year growth. And I didn't fully understand the last part, but it was explained to me that means we need, what it was getting at is we need to find the savings to pay for it on an ongoing basis. Yes. That's what it means. Councillor Tapper.
Thank you, Chair. Can you just remind us, please, what the actual monetary impact is on the council's budget for this increase for the remainder of the council's current financial year and for the forthcoming financial year? Thank you.
It's the order of £500,000 for this financial year, and it will be £1 million for a full financial year. Anything else? Staff representatives? No? Okay. Well, so we're being advised to recommend to full council that the consolidated 8% pay rise be applied to all pay scale points from the 1st of October 2022 as proposed by staff representatives and councillors of the Joint Staff Consultative Group. Are we agreed that we should recommend that to full council? Thank you very much. Agenda item 5, Agile working policy. This is yours.
Thank you, Chair. So again, just to point out the changes, so this policy went to the to the Joint Staff Consultative Committee in September. The changes to the policy you will find in the appendix, and they have been highlighted in yellow to show where those changes are. This policy has already been to the Employment Committee. I think this is the 3rd visit. We do obviously visit this on an annual basis, as it's still a fairly new policy and it's a moving feast. So we just want to ensure that we're keeping it up to date. So you will see references to virtual meetings that we've now sort of added, and software types that we are using to have those virtual meetings. We've also added sections into the management and performance area, again ensuring that we just keep things up to date and relevant to obviously an agile working environment. With regard to questions that came up at the Joint Staff Consultative Group, there are a couple of grammatical errors which have been corrected for this particular committee, but other than that, there weren't any particular queries that were raised. And again, it's opening back to the Employment Committee councillors if they have any questions.
Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a continuity thing, really. We refer to Teams and Zoom at 3.6, and then we talk about designated team areas for Teams. Are you talking about the electronic Teams there, or are you talking about Teams to be seated? So I just think it might be better, rather than specifying Teams or Zoom, that we actually change it to any approved communication method within the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, noted. And yes, so we've got clear clarification, because you're right, we're actually talking about two different things in that particular instance. So yeah, I'll correct that and take your suggestion.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just confirm with you that the grammatical errors that you discovered are the same as the ones I noted? It's on page 4 of this document at the very bottom. Off-site has become disjointed. It should be hyphenated. Shouldn't be a space in there.
Can just raise them, Councillor. I'll make sure that they're noted. So which point? Which point was that on for?
That's on page 4 of this document.
For the document.
That's page 16 of the agenda. Yeah, it's off-site, it's hyphenated, but it's got a space
We'll
in
sort
it.
that out. Yes.
And the other one that I noted is on page 31 of the agenda. That's page 19 of the document in section 15.3. I think it's fairly obvious what's happening.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agreed?
Sorry, I didn't press my button. Thank you. Agenda item 6, social networking policy.
Thank you, Chair. So again, just to note with this policy, this actually, the full policy, and whilst it is still the full policy that's coming before the Employment Committee this evening, was considered in March by the Joint Staff Consultative Group and in April 2022 by the Employment Committee. And at the Employment Committee, it was specifically requested that we looked at 8.3 of this document and that the wording actually be looked at. And I just wanted to obviously refer to that section with obviously the changed wording, and it's just really wanting to ensure that the Employment Committee is happy with that. This is specifically around WhatsApp and the requirements through FOI regarding that particular use of software. Again, any questions from councillors, happy to try and take and answer.
Just sort of, it's really a clarification that council business and decision making should be recorded and retrievable, isn't it? And that it is complicated to do that with some of these social media channels, so they should not be used for such business. Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, really. It's around the use of WhatsApp. So if you look at the agreement that each of us sign up to when we use WhatsApp, it's their agreement that is takes precedence, basically. And their agreement is that they essentially own the data. So I think we should discourage the use of WhatsApp wherever possible, if not completely and utterly eradicate it. With MS Teams now and the opportunity to download that onto mobile devices, it's a much more secure and more password protected. So I worry about the use of WhatsApp. I worry about the use of it being subject to an FOI on the basis that people tend to use it much more colloquially than they would something which is an official council app. So my personal preference is that WhatsApp shouldn't be used for council business, and with the use of Teams, I can't actually see any reason why it would be.
Yeah, please do, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. Yeah, that is duly noted. One thing I just also wanted to add is that at wider management team, we've also made it very clear, so that's our middle management group, which is quite a big group, that WhatsApp is not to be used, you know, with regard to, or I think not to be used, it can be used obviously from a personal perspective, but when you're making any council decision, it shouldn't be used for that purpose and discouraged. But if you'd like me to, are you making the suggestion, and I'm just checking obviously with the rest of the committee, that you would like me to strengthen that then even further, to actually say that WhatsApp shouldn't be being used by staff with regards to council business?
I also wonder whether the reference to Teams is about making decisions in the chat section of Teams, because I can see there will be challenges in recording and retrieving such data. Councillor Wheeler?
Yeah.
Thank you. Again, I think possibly there needs to be, this possibly needs to come back. So are we saying that all council business teams meetings should be recorded and transcribed as a matter of course? Are we saying that those that don't relate to a personal matter should be transcribed or recorded? Or just those where we are taking minutes? I also think that we need to strengthen the WhatsApp to say WhatsApp should not be used, but could be subject to, would be my preferred wording around WhatsApp, just given that the reason I know this is I've been through a legal challenge myself with a previous employer, and the WhatsApp terms were very helpful to me in that regard.
I do think there's room for greater clarity. You agree?
I'm more than happy to look at this more specifically, and perhaps to help with regard to obviously the wording of this, that perhaps we share this sort of between meetings with regards to getting, obviously looking at the detail of it, with regard to what's needed. With regard to recording Teams meetings, I would not be wanting to go down that route, because I just don't think that that's something that, I think it's one step too far with regard to that particular suggestion. But I'm happy for us, and I'm very happy to look at this as again, with regard to strengthening and discouraging and stopping staff from using WhatsApp as a way of communicating.
I suppose it goes back to the point that was raised by one of my colleagues, is that what is included in MS Teams. WhatsApp is written text, that's fairly straightforward, but with MS Teams you have recordings, you have the chat within MS Teams. So when we're saying that information posted and responded to over Teams, it is by the very nature of Teams predominantly the spoken word, isn't it?
Yes.
So I just think that paragraph possibly needs to be relooked at.
Okay. Do you have anything?
Thank you, Chairman. I think what this paragraph is seeking to do is to draw attention for staff that the things that they might consider to be informal, which is the chat function within MS Teams, or the ability to send each other messages in WhatsApp, may be recorded by somebody as part of that transaction. Not that it will be, but it may be. And if someone does record it, let's say they take a screenshot or they save the interaction in the Teams meeting and they put it on a file, well, as that has been recorded in a council file, that then is subject to FOI. And it's really important that our staff are aware of that, and they don't think that when the meeting's over, everything is gone. It might be gone, it might be deleted in most cases, but any one participant could save that chat, put it into a council file, and when we get an FOI, that contents will have to be revealed. And it's very important that staff are aware of that risk. I think that's all that paragraph is seeking to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, one of the purposes of Teams is to capture all of that information. The written text becomes a record so that the team can refer to all of the conversations, the written conversations we've had in the past. There's no requirement under Freedom of Information to provide for us to take contemporaneous notes of every single conversation that we have. And at the end of the day, Teams is also a telephone system. You don't have to do that telephone notes. So the system we should check that with IT, but it should keep every single character that's written, every little smiley emoji will be captured for posterity by Teams as a matter of course, and I don't think we need to do any more than that. I'm loath to say we shouldn't use WhatsApp, but I guess given that someone could challenge the council that decisions were being made in WhatsApp almost as a trying to avoid the scrutiny, it probably makes sense to discourage it and encourage the use of Teams instead.
Okay. I agree with Councillor Duggan about Teams. I'm not an expert on that, but I understand how Teams work, MS Teams and WhatsApp. I think what I'm struggling with, and I'd be happy for Councillor Wheeler to give me an insight, but it just says at the bottom there, staff must ensure social network sites are not used for official council business and decision making. That's pretty clear. You did have, Councillor Wheeler, maybe you thought it could be strengthened, and it sounded to me like you almost had a slight change of words and it would be strengthened. I'm loath to kind of, you've taken this away, haven't we bounced this already? And you've brought this back, saying, okay, how about this one? If we can, I'd rather not bounce it again and have you do more work and come back again. I wonder if we can just, it's saying there pretty clearly, ensure social networking sites are not used for official council business and decision making. Not sure what you could, under penalty of death, it's what else can we put in? So if you're okay, Councillor Wheeler, with what would your suggestion be? Maybe we could just see we're happy with that and just we could close this item.
I suppose for me there is a differential between MS Teams, which is a council-owned and council-managed, password-protected communication site rather than a social media site, and WhatsApp, which isn't. So by putting them together, we are essentially, I think, complicating it. So I think if we say information posted and responded, all information responded and posted to, through whichever means is subject to official, could be deemed as official council building business, that we discourage the use of social media sites for any form of communication with council business. And it should also be noted that documentation with MS Teams is subject to FOI along with all other systems, because essentially Teams is one of our systems. So it's really all we're talking about here is WhatsApp, because Teams is pretty obvious it's going to be subject to because it's one of our systems. So what we're talking about here is WhatsApp. So if we make the statement, we actively discourage the use of WhatsApp for council business and staff should be aware of blah, and we're done, aren't we? Because Teams is our system.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and I have to agree with Councillor Wheeler on this one. MS Teams is an approved system. WhatsApp clearly isn't. The concentrate on those two is probably inappropriate because I believe that people use other social media chat platforms other than just WhatsApp just as much. Messenger immediately comes to mind. And if anybody wants to use something really secretive, Signal and Telegram are also out there and are widely used. So we need to differentiate, I think, only between authorised council systems, platforms, and unauthorised council platforms. That's the only differentiation I think we need to make, and to ensure that we discourage all officers and employees of the council from using for council business any unauthorised platforms. And if at some point in time the council decides to adopt a different platform, they can simply authorise it, and we don't need to come back to this to make any changes.
Thank you. Councillor Duggan.
Yeah, I think in line with that, I think the way that you edit this to make it usable is we need to recognise that actually conflagrating Teams and WhatsApp's probably not clever. So we should say information posted and responded over social media sites such as WhatsApp is deemed as official council business and subject to Freedom of Information Act. And then almost it would say, and thus is to be discouraged by the council in preference for us using the council issued communication platform MS Teams or something along those lines.
Okay, so would we be happy to approve it on the basis that paragraph gets reworked, possibly broken into 2 paragraphs on that basis? Agreed? Thank you. Yeah, yes. That's what I understood. So, yeah, let me make sure it's absolutely clear then. So we're agreeing the recommendation to publish this social, to adopt this social networking policy on the basis that paragraph is reworked as per those discussions. Yeah. Thank you. Right, next is Christmas working arrangements. Louise, this is yours.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to, again, just give a quick, brief overview of this discussion to date. So there's a recommendation before you, and I just want to explain how we got to, obviously, that recommendation. So back on the 8th of February, and if you look at 1.6, there is a date missing, and that is the date that I've just given you, the 8th of February. When the pay settlement was agreed for 22-23, the arrangements for Christmas were agreed for December 2022. However, there was also a requirement to then look at that in preceding years. So there was then some discussion at the Joint Staff Consultative Group back in June of this year. And rather than then that coming on to the Employment Committee, the Joint Staff Consultative Group asked the staff representatives to get some further data with regard to what staff's view was with regard to the value of the current Christmas arrangement. Also, as part of the work that was completed and is an appendix to this report, was also to set out, whilst the council offices may be closed for a period of time over Christmas, that there are quite a number of services that are still operating, frontline services still operating through that period. And again, just bringing your attention to the annex, I apologise for the layout. We obviously didn't send it through terribly well. It's actually double-sided. Oh, is it okay, double-sided on electronic? But if you've got a paper copy, it's not coming out with all of the information. So just if you have a paper copy, you've got all of that information. So at this point, what has been proposed is that from December 2023, the current established arrangements over the Christmas period to be continued, including the discretionary award of a day's leave, matched by staff taking a day's leave from their annual leave entitlement, and to avoid further uncertainty, that the current established arrangements be made an ongoing contractual entitlement. Again, staff representatives are here this evening, so again, they obviously were asked to gather data. So if councillors have any particular questions they want to ask them again around that, again, they can share that information with you. But again, Chair, I take it back to you then, and obviously for councillors with any questions.
Thank you, Louise. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you. I was just looking at the annex. I hadn't seen it before, actually. Just to clarify, you've got meals at home open every day over Christmas. I think these guys do guys, girls, whatever you like to come. I think they're doing an incredible job. Windle Valley Day Centre, it says open over Christmas on 29th and 30th. So does that mean Christmas Day isn't open? It's just not incredibly clear. Open over Christmas on 29th and 30th. So, and also community transport, open over Christmas on 29th and 30th. What about does that mean it's open on Christmas Day or 24th? It doesn't actually say. Or does it say it somewhere else and I've missed it?
Councillor Hawkins, I do understand where you're coming from. My my first reaction when I saw this was I wasn't clear on whether these services were as per normal, whether they were reduced, in what respect were they reduced. And Louis, I know Louise is working on something which gives us more clarity in that respect. I guess one of the questions for today is this clear enough for us to make a decision? And I'm open to views on that. Councillor Bates.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, just on that specific point, how I've understood it is that the 29th and 30th are the days when it is open and it's not open for any other days. And the reason for that is because those are the two non-statutory days. So that's the reason for community transport and Windle Valley Day Centre. So I'm clear on that point. I should say to the committee, when this came to joint staff, I did vote against, and the reason was because at that particular time, I was unconvinced that that our vulnerable residents were sufficiently protected. We didn't have Annex A before us. We had some verbal updates on certain things. And at that particular meeting, without that information, I wasn't prepared to close, if you like, or I wasn't sure in my mind that the vulnerable residents were sufficiently protected. This listed before me, in my view, is very helpful and has clarified almost all of my points, with the exception, I think, of just a couple. The major one for me is regarding benefits, not ordinary benefits, but my concern would be where you may get somebody who submits an application on, let's say, the 23rd of December this year. And this is somebody who will be vulnerable, who may need urgent action taken, and absolutely no work, according to this sheet, will take place on that until the 3rd of January. And then obviously there will then be a further delay while that's processed. So although that's not a direct implication, it is a delay to service to a vulnerable person. So that does concern me. Now, I don't suggest that we keep the council offices open for a housing benefit officer to undertake cases, but I think this is perhaps one for the head of paid service rather than the employment committee. But I do think it would be sensible to double check this type of situation, whether an on-call officer working from home can deal with urgent cases. I just don't like the idea of somebody having almost, whether it's 10 or 11 days, where they've submitted something urgently, and according to this document, we're not going to be taking any action on it. Now, I appreciate that may be the historic situation, but the situation now is different because we now have many more people who are vulnerable compared with previous years. So I'm afraid I think this is going to be a growing issue, quite specific, I appreciate, but I think it's something we just need to be clear in our mind. My view is it may only impact on a small number of cases, but ones which will be highly important to those individuals. And so maybe an officer working from home, just dealing with urgent matters, may be the way of actually dealing with that. The only other thing I think that might be relevant to cover on here, I suspect it probably is where I assume would have a HR officer on call and a senior officer on call, because clearly, as is rightly indicated on here, large numbers of staff are going to be working, and in the event of there being either a HR emergency matter or some other management matter, I assume the same arrangements would be in place as would usually be. That doesn't necessarily be an on-call, but again, that just needs to be covered. But I'm more comfortable than I was about it. I'm not overly happy, if I'm blunt, because I used to work in Guildford over Christmas. Many other councils do, but I understand why this is being done. I do recognise it's hugely valued by staff. Most staff, there will be the odd person who'd prefer to come in, but I'm more comfortable than I was about it. And it's just those points would be appreciated to clarify, I think.
Do you want to come back?
If I may, just for... So, thank you, Councillor Bates. On the first issue, I'm really happy to take the issue of benefits and any customers, any residents who might be in need and how we might support that over the Christmas period. The balance of services that are operating and the nature of it has been informed by the level of demand that we have had in previous years, but I absolutely get the point that we are going through a particular challenging time with the cost of living crisis, and therefore I will certainly take that away and look at what sort of provision could be set aside over the Christmas period. In terms of the issue of a senior officer, you employ a chief executive who is in effect always available for issues that might arise. You know, talking about issues that need an urgent response. And I'm very lucky to be supported by a very committed corporate management team who have, whenever there's been a need, has always stepped up. So just to offer you reassurance that if the need arose over the Christmas period, I, in the first instance, and my team would be available to deal with whatever needed to be dealt with. Thank you.
Okay. So, oh, yeah, sorry, Councillor McClafferty.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I support this this proposal that the day be made contractual, and I know there's some complexity with certain departments not working, and if they are working, they get a day a different time, but I think that works out, and I think it's a good way for us to recognise and reward the staff and for their contribution and loyalty to this organisation. Maybe taking up Councillor Bates' point in finance there, the second from the bottom, partially operating with focus on treasury management and urgent benefit issues would cover that. And I do take your point, Mr. Roberts, about chief exec's always on call. But if you're away on holiday, if you're abroad or something, then I'm sure you would have somebody nominated who would do that, which is fine. And just going back to Councillor Hawkins' point, it's hard to believe that we could confuse the thing over. Yeah, Windle Valley Day Centre open over Christmas on 29th and 30th.
It's on the 25th Christmas.
Yeah,
Really?
it's we're open when we're not closed. I'm happy to take your clarification that what it means is over the Christmas period they're only open the 29th and 30th. That's what it really means. So and it's also like that for some others. We'll operate over Christmas on the 29th and 30th. So, right. So I think we can just take it as read that it doesn't need to go away again.
Okay.
But as I say, overall, I think this is an excellent.
Councillor Wheeler.
Just really what might be simpler to cover all of this is that we have emergency response on call at the moment. My rather naive assumption is that all of those functions that have access to that emergency on call, we recently voted for emergency on call, for example, for some enforcement matters, would continue to operate. And I think if we made the statement that all emergency on call services will operate on an as-needed basis over this period, we've kind of got everything covered then, haven't we?
Okay. So, are we happy to approve this on the understanding that the communication of exactly which services will, which level of service we will provide within each of the areas of service is a work in progress? This is a decision about arrangements from December 2023, but as Councillor McClafferty says, it would be preferable not to have to bring it back. The decision has been made on December 2022. I think if anything, more pressing is getting the communication right, so that come this Christmas we can explain to residents which services are available, and the answer is, the show does go on. Okay, so we agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 8, appointment subcommittee minutes. So who would talk us through this, Louise? Would I do that?
I can do that.
Oh, that's lovely, thank you.
So, Chair, this is just putting the minutes before you with regard to the appointment of the Head of Investment and Development, which was agreed as Martin Breeden, as noted here. And it's just making sure that the committee are aware of that and that we now make that information public.
So do we have a decision to make?
Just need to, if you're agreed with,
Okay, so we agreed this.
note it. Yeah.
Just note it, yeah, 'cause it's already public, isn't it?
Saying it's public.
It's already public. Okay, noted, thank
Agreed
you.
the minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so item 9, work programme 2022-23.
Thank you, Chair. So just with regard to the work programme for the 26th of January and then the 30th of March, There will just be a couple of changes, just with regard to obviously pending decision of the full council, just around pay settlement and whether or not that's still required. So just to note that those points, but otherwise it's just setting out the items that are coming before you in January and March.
Any comments? Are we agreed? Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming, including the staff. I think we can close the meeting.